First Coast's most accurate forecast from the First Coast News Weather Team, certified by Weather Rate, sponsored by AC Designs.
The beginning, and then we'll answer that, of course, coming up here in just a bit after we talk about that weekend Labor Day outlook for the First Coast. And a lot of you probably know the answer to this one, but you know what? Let's kind of remember back 20 years ago today, here in, well, late August 2005. What storm was this? And you can see the hurricane hunters flew through it. They found Category 5 winds within it. I'll give you the answer coming up in about 5 to 10 minutes. So just stand by on that. But if you are watching it on our social media platforms, you can comment on it. And if you know the answer, maybe you were impacted by it, let me know. All right, so let's talk about today's tropical outlook because we don't have any named storms outside of Fernand, which is completely weakening out. And I know you can see this wave coming off of the west coast of Africa, but the reality is a lot of dry air kind of enveloped within it. It is not organized whatsoever. And I'm not, honestly, a few people have said, I don't like the look of that to me today. And I'm saying, I'm not worried about it. If I'm worried, I'll be honest with you and I'll say I am, but I'm just not concerned. None of the long-range guidance is showing up anything on it, and it really just is being impacted by dry air. But, of course, we always need to be monitoring out here because the peak of hurricane season is coming up in just about a week. All right, closer to the near term, though, and let's talk about what's happening on the First Coast because, we don't need a hurricane to be getting the rain, okay? We have the stationary boundary that's really just dominating our entire forecast here. And we're going to be looking at scattered showers starting kind of here on our Thursday, but picking up Friday, Saturday, and also into Sunday as well. And you can kind of see, where we got some of this rainfall out there right now, actually just off the coastline of Glenn and Camden County, moving off towards the east. Earlier this morning, we had some showers further down towards the south in the St. Johns County. That's all drifted away, but, this is the case. Through the morning, we got these coastal showers, and then it's going to help build up as we go ahead through the afternoon, increasing that chance of some storms. This is actually a live look from Jack's Beach looking towards the north and east. So we got the pier right there in the foreground, and that's that storm I was just showing you offshore of the Brunswick area that's moving out to sea, but it really just shows that kind of we don't have a hurricane, but it is a very tropical, humid atmosphere out there. That's one thing. I know it's a couple days ago we had some lower dew points, but we're back up into the dew points into the 70s, up near the 80s here, and just messy. So 87 degrees, warm with some isolated showers again here on our Thursday. And then we look at our future cast, and this is what I'm talking about, that overall, if you look at the surface to the upper levels, the overall flow is going west to east. So you can see those showers kind of moving offshore, but they're going to back build as we go ahead into the evening. What I mean by that is you start to see that daytime heating combined with the instability, fire up storms not moving west, but building towards the west, out towards the I-75 corridor. So that's a key thing out there today. And this is what I was talking about. Look at our skew-T. Oh, I love using the skew-T. If anybody follows me here on these updates, I try to show this because I like to explain the weather here. And, let's actually pull up. Let me see if I can get my little arrow out here. I want to kind of show you the few things I'm looking at here and why today I'm not expecting crazy strong thunderstorms or anything like that. And this is one of the reasons. See this big gap right in here? This is about 15 to 16,000 feet up. Freezing level right now is about 14,000 feet. So that tells me, unless this breaks through this kind of cap right there, most of our storms that develop are only going to go up to 13 to 15,000 feet, which, sounds like high, but you really, for good, strong, severe storms, they has to burst through this and get up to 30 to 40,000 feet to kind of get those like severe type tornadic type cells. But this still can provide a lot of rainfall. We have temperature and dew points really close together right in that area. Our lapse rate is, not crazy high. It's about 3 to 4 degrees. And just in general, it's going to be definitely moist enough for local showers, but not strong enough for scattered thunderstorms. And also right here, I was talking about that west to east flow. You can kind of see look at the wind barbs left to right. So west to east. I like showing this because a lot of times, especially recently, and meteorologists in general get accused of just looking at the models, but we do a lot more than that. We kind of decipher what's going on in the atmosphere, not only at the surface, but all the way up through the upper atmosphere. And one of the things we do that with is the balloon launches, or SCUTs. That's a physical balloon that carries up the Raywinson. That's what the gadget is attached to it. And it measures what's going on in the atmosphere. And it's actually very valuable with making a forecast. And you can if you are a good meteorologist, you can look at that chart right there and make your forecast for not only the day of, but maybe even a couple days if you have at least a satellite picture to go with it as well, which is literally what I would do in the Navy because, when you're out in the middle of the ocean and you don't have the internet, what are you going to use? Look at the sky and look at our SCUT, right? All right, so 87 here tomorrow, AM showers in the morning. We're going to be looking at a very similar atmosphere, morning showers, and then it's going to build a little bit further towards the east. But here's the thing. Let's talk about our holiday weekend. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's going to rain, okay? Not a wash, not continuous all the time, but definitely waves of precip. Meaning showers into the morning on Saturday and Sunday, and then storms and some heavy downpours even as we go ahead through the afternoon, especially on Saturday. So beware of isolated flooding out there. And remember, if you hear the thunder, head inside. I can't stress that enough. I know you've all heard that a million times. Most people know that is the case, but I've been guilty of it. You got stuff to do outside. You hear the thunder, you're like, it's over there. But just if you do that, it's risk versus reward. And recently, people have been struck by lightning, not getting rained on, but just because there was a storm in the area. So no excuses. If you can hear the thunder, try to get to a safe space out there. I know we all want to get out and have fun on this holiday weekend. I do myself, but this stationary boundary that's going to be just set up overhead is really just going to continue to bring that instability. It drifts a little bit further towards the south here on our Friday, but then watch as it builds back towards the north as we go ahead into our Saturday. And you can see there, that's Saturday morning. Coastal storms out there. They move off, and then you get another round heading into the afternoon. And then again on Sunday, too. And what's also interesting happening on Sunday and into Monday? Look at the wind flow coming around this. It's going to start to pick up out of the north and east, and we could be getting maybe not a full-on nor'easter, but definitely enough where it could produce some beach erosion and increased tides and definitely rip currents on Labor Day, Monday there, over towards Tuesday. Now, if you want drier weather, you can head up to central northern Georgia or even into the Carolinas. Much drier. This boundary is the separation point of that. Along it and south of it, it's going to be moist with that rainfall. But, if it settles a little bit further towards the south, it could improve the conditions at the very least for a good portion of southeast Georgia, if you're watching here, of course, from the First Coast. So here's a look at that extended forecast I got for you. Thursday, Friday, we got temperatures into the high 80s. It cools down just a little bit over the weekend, but the reasoning for that is, of course, the cloud skies and the rainfall that's going to go with it. So I'm just checking to see if anybody's answered this trivia question just real quick here for you. If you started off or you just jumped on here, I asked 20 years ago today, hurricane hunters were flying through a storm. Which storm was it? So if you're just joining in, try to put the question down there below. We'll get to that in a second. I do want to remind you, though, peak of hurricane season is September 10th. We're about a week and a half out, but at least for the time being, I don't see anything on the horizon. Nothing that I'm terribly concerned about, but we all know that sometimes it just takes an area of convection, especially in these warm waters off the coast of Florida. It can even spin up things pretty quickly. So it would be a rarity to not have a storm system on September 10th. I got to look back and try to find the stats on that because it's a rarity. It's not common. So we're right near the cusp here, if you will. All right, so here's the trivia. 20 years ago, we had this hurricane hunter out there. Which storm was it? I think most of you probably know. It was Hurricane Katrina. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's been 2 decades now here since that storm came out shore. And remember, this actually made landfall in Florida. In fact, rain bands from it impacted Jacksonville. I know this because I remember going to a Jags game and it was thundering and raining out, and it was as Katrina was coming on shore as a Cat 1 in South Florida. Now, that was, yes, it was deadly in South Florida. It had impacts. But, of course, what it's known for is what happened out towards the Gulf Coast. Peaked as a Cat 5, where I just showed you that photo from with the hurricane hunters, and it came on shore, well, yeah, here on August 29th, so 20 years ago tomorrow. Peaked as a Cat 5 20 years ago today, there in southern Louisiana. Record-breaking storm surge in Bay St. Louis there on the Gulf Coast, 28 feet. And then, of course, the levees breaking after the storm passed on by, which is why a lot of people consider it almost as much of a man-made disaster as it was a natural one, because, boy, it had some after-the-fact impacts. And to say that the relief efforts were mismanaged would be putting it lightly. But I can't tell you the National Weather Service did their job. And this is an incredible from the National Weather Service in New Orleans statement that they put out just prior to landfall. I remember reading this and just going, oh my God. And I just started in meteorology. I was only about 2 years in. I was here in Jacksonville, and this was just, wow. Most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength. Most of the area is going to be uninhabitable for weeks, and it was. So the National Weather Service, even 20 years ago, just on top of it. But wow, this I have an article at firstcoastnews.com kind of breaking down this timeline, including this right here if you want to take a closer look at it. But what I do want to share with you, though, is I mentioned that storm surge in Bay St. Louis, right? 28 feet. Now, I know someone, storm chaser by the name of Josh Morgan. He's been in like 70 eye walls. It's absolutely incredible. That's not even an exaggeration. I think he holds the record for the most, beating out other big names that you might think have been through more hurricanes. He just built a house in Bay St. Louis. And he took me a walk around the streets to kind of show where some lots are still empty, still damaged, and how that city is recovering. So here's my conversation with him about 20 years after Hurricane Katrina. It's been 20 years since Hurricane Katrina brought devastating conditions and a record-breaking storm surge here along the Gulf Coast, and specifically here in Bay St. Louis. 2 decades later, they're still feeling the impacts.
It's almost impossible to put it into words, I think, for just like normal folks that can't get their head around what happened.
Now, this is Josh Morgan. He holds the record for the most eye wall penetrations on Earth for any storm chaser. And he just recently built a home in Bay St. Louis.
Look at this entire neighborhood around us. Just look all around. Okay, it was basically obliterated. Every house you see was built after Katrina because this whole neighborhood was just wiped off the map. It looked like Hiroshima, just like a nuclear bomb had dropped. And it was because of that down the street. You could see it right there, the Gulf. It just came up. Some folks say it was over 30 feet, and it just swept this neighborhood clean.
So you say it swept it clean, and there's the Gulf right there. How high was the estimated storm surge that came through this area? And, of course, this was all with Katrina. Can you just talk about how the potency of that storm?
Absolutely. One of the things that makes Katrina so distinctive was that it was the highest storm surge on record in any storm in the Western Hemisphere. So this was like a cataclysmic event. It was a Category 3 hurricane. In terms of winds, it wasn't that distinctive, but the storm surge was enormous. And like I said, it was record-breaking. Now, the official estimate is 28 feet, but a lot of folks around here, locals, will tell you no way it was higher. Now, I don't take a position on that, but what I do know is that the destruction was fitting for a record-breaking storm. It was off the charts. And by the way, not just here in Bay St. Louis, but the entire Mississippi coast out to Gulfport, Biloxi, even to Pascagoula, even into Alabama. And that's one of the things that made Katrina, or I should say another thing that made Katrina special was, it wasn't just that the storm surge was high, it was that the area of really high storm surge over 20 feet was miles and miles and miles.
So you've been, how many storms now?
I've been inside the inner cores of 80 hurricanes and typhoons, 80, which is a world record.
And I guess based on your experience and based on the storm surges you've seen, what makes the kind of the Gulf Coast more vulnerable when it comes to that?
I'm glad you asked that, because there's a lot of factors, and the U.S. Gulf Coast is one of the most vulnerable places on Earth, okay? I think if there's two places on Earth that are just crazy vulnerable to storm surge, one is the U.S. Gulf Coast, and the other is the top of the Bay of Bengal, where the country Bangladesh is, okay? And the reason that both these areas get such spectacular storm surges is because the water offshore is really shallow. So I grew up in New York on Long Island, and when I would go to the beach when I was growing up, I'd walk out into the water, and 20 feet out you're in deep water. Okay, here you walk a mile out and you're still up to your, not even up to your waist.
Wow.
The water is so shallow, and this sounds really counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but the shallower the water offshore, it's just some fluid dynamic thing, the bigger the storm surge can be. So we had this special shallow water here. The top two storm surges in American history were both in Mississippi, right around here.
Wow. So you were talking about this coming through. So lots like this that are still empty. Is this just kind of what was left over from Katrina 20 years ago?
Any empty lots around Old Town, Bay St. Louis, you can assume that there was a house there that maybe stood for 100 years or more that was then just wiped away, and it hasn't been built back. But look at it this way, this whole area after Katrina was clean. If you go back at Google Maps street level and you go back to 2008, there's nothing. There's just a field and that one sort of cinder block house next to mine. That was it. This place was just swept clean. So most of the neighborhood is actually built back. It's actually, to me, it's incredible what they've done in 20 years. But all around Bay St. Louis, you will find an empty lot here or there. You'll find a staircase to nowhere, the front steps of a house that's no longer there. There's still these sort of, I call them they're almost like the grave sites of Katrina.
What would be your advice, especially ahead of any storm? And we're talking about not building a house, but just preparing, especially for a neighborhood like this, or even on the Jacksonville area where you do have those lying flood-prone areas. What would be your advice based on all of your experience and everything ahead of a hurricane or just hurricane season in general?
I would say when a hurricane is coming, there's two basic things you got to know. Is your house high enough to escape storm surge or other kinds of flooding that might occur? And is it strong enough to withstand the wind? So there's two different hazards, and they hit houses different ways, and you have to make sure that where you are is cool for both, that it's going to withstand both. And sometimes it's not clear. And I would also say, when in doubt, leave and ride it out in a sturdier building, ride it out in an official shelter. Don't take a chance, because I'll say this, there's nothing scarier than being in a house that starts to fill with water or blow apart during a hurricane. That's just one of the scariest things. Even for me, I'm a storm chaser, I'm experienced. I don't like that. Even though Katrina was 20 years ago, people here talk about it like it was yesterday, because the scars were so deep, the impacts were so big. Everyone's life changed like dramatically from this hurricane. I think most people down here in coastal Mississippi, I think their lives, they divided into two phases, before Katrina and after. It bent the arc of everyone's life, so people don't forget it, and I think that it'll always be that way. Now, in a place that hasn't had a hurricane for a really long time, or a devastating one, for example, the Jacksonville, St. Augustine kind of area, I think that what happens is people get complacent. They just start to forget that there can be another big event like a Dora or something like that. I mean, my God, it's been over 60 years now. And I think that creates danger, creates complacency. I imagine people in Northeast Florida think, oh, we can't really get hit, or we're safe. And you're not. These things always return. And I think there's a challenge in helping people viscerally understand the danger and respect it.
Well, people that might be moving into hurricane country, albeit along the Gulf Coast or maybe in Florida, what is your advice for building a new house, looking for a new house? What should people be looking for to protect themselves against future storms?
Well, I think one of the most important things is your elevation, and that was something that mattered to me. Now, this neighborhood was devastated by Hurricane Katrina's storm surge, but Katrina's storm surge was the highest on record in the Western Hemisphere, probably like a 300 to 500 year event. Otherwise, this neighborhood is actually pretty high. This ground here is 19 feet, which is actually pretty good for coastal Mississippi, and you can see I raised it a few feet above that. So my number one piece of advice is make sure you've got some decent elevation, or if you don't have good elevation, the other thing is to really focus on building a kind of house that's high enough, Like, to boil it down, I'd say there's three things that I really sort of cared about as I built the house. And by the way, these are things you can all improve in an existing house. The first thing is the roof. As I always say, if your roof stays on during a hurricane, you're going to be okay. But if it tears off, it's game over. So you got to make sure that roof stays on. This is a standing seam metal roof, which is one of the best kinds for getting through a hurricane. I went through a Category 5 in the Bahamas, a high-end Category 5, and the houses with these kinds of roofs got through it and it stayed on. So that's one thing I'll say. These kind of roofs are more expensive, but they actually make a difference. The second thing is make sure you've got some kind of system for protecting your windows, because your windows are like the Achilles heel of your house. Now, a window breaking during a hurricane, it's the problem isn't just that you're going to get a little rain in. It's that once the wind gets inside the structure, it's like air getting in a balloon. It can do all kinds of additional structural damage. You got to keep the wind out. And there's two ways basically. One is to have impact glass, okay? The other is to have some kind of window covering. And so for me, I went with the window coverings. These shutters here, they're not just a decoration. These are actually real shutters that I close and seal when a hurricane comes. And you can see it's got this shiny, this is a polycarbonate layer. It's another layer of sort of impact resistance to protect the house from flying debris. But when a hurricane's coming, I just shut this whole house up. And that's what works for me. If you don't have one of those two things, you're gonna be stuck boarding, which is a real pain in the butt. And the third thing I'll say is your siding really matters. I think of this, like my siding, as like the house's coat of armor. Okay, one of the scariest things about a hurricane is when the wind really starts to rip, the flying debris, the wreckage flying through the air. It's one of the scariest things. And that flying wreckage can actually penetrate through walls. So you need good hard siding. And I'm not talking wood and I'm not talking vinyl. You need fiber cement like this. It looks like wood, but it's not. This is from James Hardie. And this stuff, like I said, it's the coat of armor that protects my house. Also, take hurricanes out of the equation. The other thing that matters is that it's moisture resistant. It doesn't rot or mold or anything like that. It doesn't even burn, and termites hate it. So I would say get siding on your house that is climate and weather resistant. I think that's something that's going to make you happy, even if you're not getting hurricanes.
Definitely smart to heed advice from those people that have been through some of these destructive storms and seen the impacts on their community. I'm meteorologist Robert Speta, First Coast News, on your side. All right. So, yeah, that was some good advice there from Josh. And just it was pretty incredible walking around that neighborhood there in Bay St. Louis and still seeing all the empty lots where, they were just washed away. There was significant damage. The homes that have been built back or built back better lifted up. But as he said there, and one of the things that I kind of took away from it was there along the Gulf Coast, including New Orleans and in the Mississippi, is the stark difference between just that lifetime event between life before Katrina and life after Katrina. I left Biloxi. In fact, I was going to school at Keesler Air Force Base in 2005. I left a week before the storm hit up, and then I returned a couple weeks later, and it's just different. And then I went back for more schooling a couple years later, and absolutely different. Just with the makeup, the general just activities there, just everything changed. So it is definitely one of those things where we look back 20 years ago. The anniversary of landfall is tomorrow. Today it peaked as a Cat 5. And we just, you got to remember it, learn from the past. You can better prepare for the future. For now, though, I'm meteorologist Robert Speta, as always, doing my best to keep you informed on the weather out here, not only in the tropics, but of course, locally. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have that heavy rainfall in our forecast. Not tropical related, but still some decent thunderstorms out there this weekend for the First Coast. So, yeah, as always, thanks for stopping by, and hope you stay dry and you have a good weekend out there.